Another season of The Flash, which is season 8, has come to an end, and that also means another review/rant about said season coming from right here. Now, last time I reviewed one of the worst seasons of television I've ever seen, which is season 7, obviously, which was unwatchably bad. It was awful, and while it certainly wasn't that bad this time around, it still isn't at the level of quality that it can be, or even at the level of quality that you would expect, or that you would have expected from the even mid-tiers of The Flash from before Eric Wallace took over. So with that in mind, let's begin this review right away with everything that makes it an improvement over Season 7 before going into also what makes it not as good as it could be or that it should be. So first of all, now that the season is over, I can confidently say that they stuck to making Barry Allen more competent this time around. Like, it wasn't just in the beginning, because I did mention this in my Armageddon review and in my Deathstorm arc review. It actually stuck around for the entirety of the season. He stayed competent, which is such a breath of fresh air after the, like I said, unwatchable Season 7, where one of the biggest problems was that Barry Allen was just such an incompetent superhero in that season. He had to be told what to do and, like, the plans by Chester and other members of Team Flash. That does happen a couple times in this season, but there's way more times where he's the one coming up with the plans. He's the one coming up with, like, maybe a creative use of his powers, and he does it by himself, which it feels a lot better knowing that the main character and a superhero has been around for 8 years now, knows what he's doing. There is still room for improvement. I don't think Barry has ever felt as competent as, say, Oliver Queen has in the better seasons of Arrow, but it is definitely an improvement, and that is something that I definitely needed to mention. Also having to do with Barry, they finally gave him his gold boots in this season, which just completes the look. It's such a top-tier superhero costume at this point, a top-tier live-action superhero costume that I honestly don't know how they could improve on. The only thing that's weird to me is that they made a poster about it. They made this big epic moment of him getting his gold boots, when honestly, he should have just gotten them a long time ago, and it should have just been on the costume this entire time. It's like they on purpose left it out so that they can build it up for an epic moment in Season 8, which is a bit weird, but I gotta say it did kind of work because it was a pretty exciting moment to see him finally get the gold boots, and it definitely completes the look. It's such a cool costume at this point. I will say that the villains are certainly a lot better this season. I mean, last season we had Mirror Monarch, who was awful. We had the Forces and the Speed Force, which was awful, and Godspeed, which was a huge disappointment and such a cringy arc. This time around we got Despero, who not only looked cool, like the CGI was pretty good, but also he had a unique and interesting motivation and connection to the Armageddon storyline. You also had Deathstorm, who looked cool as well. Like, the characters actually, the CGI characters looked pretty cool in this season, so I don't know if the CGI improved, but they definitely used it more effectively this time around. I mean, in Season 7 we got the Strength Force creature woman who looked awful, just absolutely awful. And while Reverse Flash was not at his peak this season, it is still better than anything Godspeed gave us in Season 7. So yeah, that's another thing they definitely improved this time around. The villains, at least, not just like looking cool and being good villains, but at least they were memorable. Despero and Deathstorm, and obviously Reverse Flash is always memorable. They were just all memorable, except for the negative forces, which I'll get to again in the negative part of the video. But yeah, they were memorable villains. They worked for the most part. Definitely not like S tier or even A tier, but the fact that they don't go any lower than the B tier, or most of them are in the B, that is, again, a huge improvement over Season 7. So let's talk about all 3 arcs for a second, and I'm not going to delve into the Armageddon or Death Revisited arcs too deep because I did that already in my reviews for those arcs. But I will say that the Armageddon arc is a pretty fun one and has some really good twists and turns, as well as a decent enough Reverse Flash time plot that kind of feels like it would have been good for like a graphic novel or something, or a couple issues of a comic book. Like, it felt like something that was right out of the comics. Although I would say there are a lot of cringy moments in that crossover event, if you want to call it that, and there are characters that are used so terribly, like Ryan Choi, Alex Danvers, and Batwoman, all of which was really in just one episode. those are characters and their scenes were really difficult to watch. And then scenes like Chester and Allegra's relationship in the future, things that I do not care about in the slightest. It definitely brought that Armageddon arc down, but in general, I thought that it was pretty fun and certainly a lot better than what we got last year, that's for sure. Then there's also the Death Revisited arc, which was pretty decent and had a good looking villain at the very least. Like, as a villain he worked. He just didn't appear nearly as much as he should have. And while Frost's death is the biggest death of the season, and I am glad it happened, it wasn't really emotional for me. It's just that it's a positive because it got rid of a bit of the Flash's awful supporting cast. Although Frost is not the character I wanted to die the most. There's Chester, Allegra, and Cecile, all of which I'll get to in my negative part of the video, which I know is seeping into the positive part a bit as well. The last arc of the season, which is called It's All Negative, was definitely the worst one of the three, and I'm going to talk about it a lot more in the negative part of the video, but I would say that it's not awful. It's better than anything in Season 7, so it's not bad, but it's not good either. It's like the most average arc of The Flash that we've gotten so far. And the final positive thing I have to say about Season 8 is, honestly, it started as a positive, but it didn't end up being a positive at all. And that's the fact that they brought back Matt Letscher as Eobard Thawne, something that I've been clamoring for basically ever since Season 3, where he appeared in the Flashpoint episode, and in that one episode, and then also subsequently in Legend of Tomorrow Season 2, he proved that he is the actor they should be using for any Eobard Thawne appearance going forward, unless it happens to be a flashback or time travel episode where they go to the events of the Flash Season 1, or the 14 years that happened before that, because that's the only time period where it makes sense for Eobard Thawne to look like Harrison Wells. But it's also the fact that Matt Letscher is just better. He's a better Eobard Thawne. He's more comic accurate. Honestly, Tom Cavanagh has not been doing anything good in the role since Season 1, and Matt Letscher has proven himself to be a very, very good Eobard Thawne, so it baffled me that they have not been using him this entire time. Like, Harrison Wells was Eobard Thawne, or Tom Cavanagh was in Crisis on Earth X, Flash Season 5, and 6, and 7, and 8, all these seasons and crossovers where Matt Letscher should have been there, and it would have been so much better if he was. So the fact that they finally brought him back was exciting, but that brings us to the negative of the season, and from here on out I'm going to be very negative because Matt Letscher, well, starting with him, was completely wasted on this weird good guy version of Eobard Thawne, who I expected to get his memory back or be revealed that he was planning this entire time, maybe adapt a bit of the Return of Barry Allen storyline where Eobard Thawne came back in time and actually did lose his memory and he thought that he was Barry Allen, but then he got it back and remembered who he was. Maybe they could have been adapting a bit of that, but no, he was just a good guy with no memory, and then he was killed and replaced by Tom Cavanagh's Thawne in a scene that looked cool and was a bit horrifying, and honestly they pulled it off pretty well, but it's such an awful reveal. They finally brought back Matt Letscher only to rip his face open and replace him with an inferior version of the character that we've seen over and over again in the last season. It was such a stupid scene for me. I think that Grant Gustin was pulling it off really well, the shock and reveal of it all, and the fact that Iris just died. Grant Gustin was great in that scene, and again, the CGI and the horrifying elements of it, it was all good, but the aftermath of it and the reveal itself was it was just so damn disappointing to me, because they brought back Matt Letscher that had so much potential with the character, maybe even seeing a version of Eobard Thawne from before the events of the Flash Season 1 again, which we've seen in one episode so far, but no, they wasted it completely on yet another Tom Cavanagh Eobard Thawne storyline. And on top of that, it was arguably the worst Tom Cavanagh's Thawne has ever been. I mean, it's not just the bait and switch that really pissed me off, it's also that Thawne was very poorly written, and honestly has been poorly written since Eric Wallace took over. He just does not know how to write the character very well, and I don't know if it's because of Eric Wallace, but Tom Cavanagh has been doing, honestly, an awful job with the character, again, ever since Season 6. He was still pretty good in Season 5, but ever since Season 6, ever since Eric Wallace took over, he's just overacts the shit out of Eobard Thawne, and it's getting to the point where it's a bit hard to watch, it's a bit cringy. I know I said Eobard Thawne was a positive in the season because he was better than Godspeed, and he was in the Armageddon arc, but I don't think he was all that much better than Godspeed in the final arc. Not only did he look so stupid, the new costume was awful. Like, I think that it could have been good if they added a chin strap, but Eobard looked really awkward in the costume without the chin strap, with his regular chin area being exposed, just like how Barry Allen looked weird in the Flash Season 5 suit. I kind of feel like these are costumes that need a chin strap, but it's not just the fact that he looked stupid, it's also the way he was used. Now, I don't actually think it's the worst idea in the world to have this fight or this battle where... Now, I don't actually think it's the worst thing... Now, I don't actually think it's the worst idea in the world what they did here with the Flash and the Reverse Flash fighting with all the powers of all the forces. So they don't just have speed powers, they also have super strength and maybe even can Hulk up a bit. They have mind powers and these weird tentacles that they added to that. And they have a greater control over time, stopping time, reversing time, making time go faster, or any of those things. All things that could come together for a very creative fight scene. The problem is that, while I think the 2-minute fight scene that we did have was pretty cool, it was just 2 minutes, and then it culminated in Reverse Flash looking, again, very stupid, flying up in the air with his powers and shooting lightning bolts at everybody, while Barry just sits down and has the lamest version of the Zack Snyder's Justice League at the Speed Force scene, where instead of running and reversing time, he just sits there in reversing time without the epic music as well. It's basically taking everything that was good about that scene, everything that made Zack Snyder's Justice League Flash epic scene so epic, just taking everything out of it. The visuals are not very good compared to that, the music is nowhere near as good, and Barry's not running, he's just sitting there. Imagine how cool this scene would have been, or, you know, as cool as it could have been given the context, if the Flash was running, if the visuals were a bit better, and if the music was epic. That's something I miss so much about the Flash, the epic music in the background while the speedsters are running, or speedsters are accomplishing these epic feats with their powers. Those are my favorite scenes in, like, superhero media in general. There's so many scenes that come to mind, not just from this show. There's, like, the Enter Flash time scene, there's where he time traveled for the first time, there's Zack Snyder's scene in Justice League, and there's also, like, Wally in Justice League Unlimited, all these speedster scenes with the epic music in the background where it's focusing on nothing but the godlike powers of speedsters. That's something that I can't think we haven't had any of that since like season 4, and I miss it so much, and they could have had it here. Maybe it would have been a bit derivative of Zack Snyder's Justice League, but I don't care. It would have been so cool to see with this superior version of Barry Allen, if I'm being honest. But no, he was just sitting there, the visuals were fine, and the music was non-existent. And that's really disappointing. Now, obviously, we can't talk about the negatives of this show without talking about the absolute blight that is the goddamn supporting cast. The cast of the show has gotten worse and worse with the seasons. First of all, there's Allegra, who I don't remember doing anything in this season. Not a single thing. It could be also because I skipped through all the scenes where it's just her and her own newspaper supporting cast, but the fact that you could skip through those things and not miss a single thing proves that she's useless and worthless to this show. The same thing could also be said about Chester, who the only scenes I can remember him having are the scenes with his father in the Deathstorm arc, which are arguably some of the least interesting scenes in that arc. Chester at least has a bit of usefulness to the show, and you can't really skip through all of his scenes, but still, he is a complete nothing burger of a character. And don't get me started on maybe the worst character that the show has ever had, and maybe the worst use of any character in the entirety of the series, which comes from this season, not from season 7, and that's Cecile Horton, who has, like I said, become the worst character on this show, thanks to her powers and how they use them. The writers use her powers as a crutch. This is something that I went deep into in my Deathstorm arc review, but they use it as a crutch and kind of a shortcut for conveying the emotions of the other characters, so they don't have to write those characters with any nuance or emotion. They could be as lazy as possible. Cecile just has a headache every single time any emotion needs to be conveyed, and then it's like, oh, Barry, you're so angry or sad, Iris just died, you're probably super angry, instead of just conveying it on the faces of the actors. It's not only insulting to the actors, who have proven time and time again, especially Grant Gustin, who has proven time and time again that he is a good actor. Like, he really knows what he's doing with the emotional scenes. There's one scene in this season I can remember Grant being allowed to do anything with his face or nuanced emotion being shown with his acting, which is a scene right after Iris quote-unquote dies. But other than that, there's really nothing, and I don't think I could hold that against Grant, because every single time he could have the opportunity to show any emotion, instead of doing that, instead of having this scene where you see the actor's face emoting and you have this emotional music in the background and you have much more subtle dialogue, they have the most unsubtle dialogue of all time of just Cecile telling us the emotions that the characters are feeling, and it's so frustrating. It's so insulting to the actors, but also insulting to the audience, who are now being treated like children. And when I say children, I mean 4-year-olds who have to be told every single emotion that the characters are feeling. And her arc in the final episodes of her powers getting stronger, I mean, really, some of the most difficult scenes to sit through of The Flash ever. This is something that was not improved, and in fact, it was worse than Season 7. Cecile as a character in Season 8 has become absolutely insufferable, and in my opinion has become the physical embodiment of how much effort the writers and the showrunner specifically is putting into this show right now, because they cannot be bothered to put in the effort to write the characters with any emotion or nuance. Instead, they're just writing it into the most unsubtle lines of all time, and it's the worst thing about this season by far. So in conclusion, yes, this was a huge improvement over Season 7 with a much more competent Barry, who also got some sick new gold boots, much better villains, and much more memorable villains at that, as well as storylines. But there are a lot of negatives, like Tom's Thawne is so overused and not used well. They completely wasted Matt Letcher, and the supporting cast are even more insufferable potentially than in Season 7 because of Cecile. If I had to give this season a number rating, it would probably be the average of the arcs ratings, which are a 7 out of 10 for Armageddon, 6 out of 10 for Death Revisited, and a 5 out of 10 for It's All Negative, which the average of is a 6 out of 10, and yeah, that is ignoring the interlude episodes, but I didn't really want to bring the average of the season down below 6. I was considering giving it a 5.5 because the interlude episodes are obviously filler and don't really mean much, but some of them were not very bad, and just looking at the season as a whole, I don't think a 5.5 out of 10 is what it deserves. I think it deserves a 6, which isn't a very good looking rating, but considering the fact that anything above a 5 is more positive than negative, and I think that the 10 out of 10 rating systems have been completely skewed by the internet and the public as a whole, where a 6 out of 10 is considered bad. I don't think a 6 out of 10 is bad. I think a 6 out of 10 is mediocre at the worst, but it's more positive than negative, and considering the fact that Season 7 deserves like a 2 out of 10, it's certainly a huge improvement. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below at all the points I brought up, and maybe some things that I forgot to or left out, because I do think there are a couple things. But what did you think about this season? Did you think it was better than Season 7 or worse? Where would you put it on the ranking with the rest of the seasons? And if you want to also rank the villains of the season, if you want to hear my ranking, it's honestly, I don't know. Bye bye.